Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. Today's guest is Lyle Hutchins, 59 years old, a retired union electrician out of California's Central Valley. 34 years running wire through other people's houses, other people's businesses, other people's dreams. Lyle thought he'd finally gotten smart with his money right before he came here. He thought this time he had the whole thing figured out. What happened over the next year and a half is going to make you rethink what doing it right even means in this country. Before we get into it, a lot of you have been asking for something you can actually reference after watching these stories. So we put together a guide based on what we've learned from all of them. It's linked in the description, if that's useful to you. Okay, here's Lyle, in his own words. So I spent 34 years as an electrician. Local 340, out of Stockton. Residential, some commercial, a couple hospital jobs toward the end that paid real well. And in 34 years, you learn something about problems. Every problem has a cause. You don't guess. You test. Continuity. Voltage. Ground fault. You trace it back until you find the break. That was my whole life. Find the break. Fix the break. Move to the next house. Should have applied that thinking to people. Didn't. 18 months before I came out here, a guy I worked with, Ray, good guy, we ate lunch together for probably 10 years, pitches me on a solar startup. Residential installs, guy had contracts lined up, said the whole thing. I want to say I didn't just fall for it blind. I asked questions. I looked at some paperwork. But at the end of the day, I trusted him more than I trusted the numbers. And that's backwards for a guy who spent his whole career trusting the numbers. Gone. Most of it. I had a decent 401k, some union pension on top. Figured I was set. Watched about 2/3 of the savings just disappear over a year and a half, and a company folded. Ray stopped answering his phone. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you the whole sob story, because you didn't come here for that. Point is, that's what broke me. Not a divorce, not a woman, not my health. A guy I trusted for a decade, and a spreadsheet I didn't check close enough. I sold the house. Modest place, nothing fancy, but it was paid off, and that gave me some cushion back. I had my pension. I had what was left. I called my brother, he's up in Oregon, and I told him, I need somewhere warm, somewhere cheap, somewhere nobody's trying to sell me anything. He laughed, said good luck finding that anywhere on earth. I went down a hole on YouTube. I mean a real hole. 3, 4 in the morning some nights, watching guys my age standing on beaches in flip-flops, talking about how their pension goes twice as far here. Condos for pennies on the dollar compared to California. Ocean out the window. And look, I want to be honest with you. I wasn't looking for a woman. I want to be real clear about that up front, because I know how these stories usually go. And that wasn't me. I was looking for distance. Distance from Ray. Distance from anybody back home who knew what happened. Distance from that specific look people give you when they know you got taken. Palawan kept coming up, Puerto Princesa specifically. One guy's whole channel was just him doing a beach walk every morning and talking about grocery prices. Underground river, some of the best diving in the world supposedly, cost of living about 1/3 of what I was paying in the Central Valley. And something about it just, I don't know. It looked quiet. That's really what I wanted. Quiet. I told myself I was going to be careful this time. That was the whole deal I made with myself before I even booked the flight. No big investments. No trusting some guy's word over paperwork again. I'd read enough. My brother sent me a couple articles, actually, about foreigners getting burned out here, losing everything to some woman or some business deal that fell apart. Property scams. Guys signing things they didn't understand. And I remember thinking, Not me. I already learned that lesson. Paid full price for it, too. Funny thing to think, looking back. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. I booked a one-way ticket out of Sacramento to Puerto Princesa. One stop in Manila. 59 years old. 60 coming up quick. And I remember sitting in that airport thinking this was either the smartest thing I'd ever done or the dumbest, and I genuinely couldn't tell you which. My brother drove me to the airport. He didn't say much, just told me to call him when I landed, and then right before I went through security he said, "Watch yourself over there, Lyle." Like I was a kid again. I had about 95,000 left after the house sale and what the solar thing didn't take. Plus the pension coming in every month, which isn't huge, but it's steady. Social Security kicks in a few years down the line, too, so I wasn't destitute. Comfortable, I'd have called it. Comfortable enough to rebuild something, if I was careful. I remember packing my tools. My actual tool bag, half of it anyway, a good multimeter, some basic hand tools. My ex used to give me grief about that, said I'd bring a wire stripper to my own funeral. But there was something about having them with me. Felt like the one part of my life that hadn't lied to me. 34 years reading circuits. A man learns to trust a system he can test. Wires either live or it's not. Ground's either good or it's not. No feelings involved, no salesmanship, just the truth sitting there waiting for you to check it. I thought I was bringing that same discipline with me to the Philippines. I really did. I had no idea yet how much of what I was about to build over there would have no paper trail at all. No continuity test for a handshake. No multimeter for a man's word, or a family's, or my own judgment, for that matter. But that's getting ahead of things again. Let me start from when I actually landed. Landed in Puerto Princesa on a Tuesday, middle of the afternoon, and the heat hit me before I even got off the jet bridge. Not California hot. California hot you can escape by walking into a building. This was different. This was wet. My glasses fogged up walking from the plane to the terminal, and I remember thinking, well, that's new. Grabbed my bags, found a tricycle outside, this little motorcycle with a sidecar welded on, painted up in about 6 different colors. Driver's got a rosary hanging off the mirror. And I asked him to take me to the apartment I'd rented sight unseen off Facebook Marketplace. Small place, 1 bedroom, off Rizal Avenue. Ceiling fan, no aircon in the main room, which I regretted by about day 2. The whole ride over, I've got jeepneys passing us on both sides, horns going, some kid selling fish balls on a stick standing right in traffic like it's nothing. Roosters somewhere, even in the middle of the city. I didn't know roosters just lived in cities here. Nobody tells you that. First couple weeks I mostly just adjusted. Figured out where the mercury drug was for my blood pressure pills. Found a Gaisano mall that had a decent grocery section, though half the American stuff I was used to either wasn't there or cost triple. Learned pretty quick that when a guy at the market quotes you a price, that's not the price, that's an opening bid, and you're supposed to haggle a little or he actually looks a bit disappointed in you. Took me a while to get comfortable with that. Back home you get the sticker price and that's that. Here it's more of a conversation. Nights were rough, not going to lie. Heat doesn't let up much even after dark, and the karaoke. Lord. Somebody 2 houses down had a machine, and there was one guy who murdered my way, probably 4 nights out of 7. I got used to it eventually. Didn't have much choice. Now here's the thing. I'd read enough before I came out here. My brother sent me a couple of those articles. Guys losing their retirement to some girl they met online. Guys getting talked into buying property that wasn't even legal for them to own. So I made myself a rule. No bars, no dating apps, None of that Filipina Cupid stuff everybody talks about. I wasn't out here for that, and even if I had been, I wasn't going to be the guy in the article. I was proud of that, honestly. Felt like I was the one expat doing it smart. About 5-6 weeks in, the wiring in my apartment started acting up. Bathroom outlet kept tripping, and one of the ceiling fixtures in the kitchen had this flicker that I recognized right away. Loose neutral, probably. Maybe a bad connection somewhere in the junction box. 34 years? You just know. My landlord didn't want to deal with it. Kept saying he'd send someone. Never did. So I walked myself down to a hardware supply place. A local guy at the Sorry store pointed me toward, just outside town, on the road toward the airport, figuring I'd buy what I needed and fix it myself. Wasn't hard to find. Corrugated metal roof, stacks of PVC pipe out front, a hand-painted sign that just said, "Construction Supplies." No name I could make out. Walked in, and there's a woman behind the counter with a ledger open in front of her, pencil behind her ear, work boots, hair tied back, no makeup that I could tell. Not dressed up. Not trying to be anything. I asked about voltage regulators, and she didn't miss a beat. Told me the ones they had wouldn't handle what I was describing, and I'd be better off with a different brand from a shop closer to the city center. Wrote the name down for me on a scrap of receipt paper. Didn't try to sell me something I didn't need. That's Marites. That was my first impression of her, and honestly, it held up for a long time. A woman who'd rather lose a sale than lose your trust. I bought some wire nuts and a junction box off her anyway. Just small stuff. Maybe 400 pesos total. Nothing. But I went back a few days later for something else. Then again, the week after that, for something else again. If I'm honest with myself now, some of those return trips I didn't strictly need to make. There's a difference between needing a part and wanting an excuse. We talked shop, mostly. Inventory turnover, her family's margins on cement versus lumber, why Chinese-made rebar was cheaper, but she didn't trust the tensile strength on it. I found myself actually looking forward to those conversations in a way I hadn't expected. After Ray, after getting talked into something with a smile and a firm handshake, there was something almost restful about a woman who just told you flat out if a product was garbage. About the 6th or 7th visit, she mentioned her family had a warehouse operation a little further out, said her father managed the bigger orders from there, and asked if I wanted to see it sometime, since I clearly knew my way around wiring and their setup out there was, in her words, a mess. I said sure. Didn't think much of it in the moment. Just seemed like two people who liked talking about work, one of them offering the other a look at the operation. I didn't know yet that it was the first door into something a lot bigger than a loose neutral in a kitchen ceiling. The warehouse sat about 15 minutes past the hardware shop, down a road that turned to gravel, and then back to pavement, for no reason I could figure out. Corrugated roof, stacks of hollow blocks out front, a covered area where a couple guys were cutting rebar with an angle grinder, sparks flying, nobody wearing safety glasses. First thing I noticed, before I even said hello to anybody, 34 years in the trade, you can't turn that part of your brain off. Marites introduced me to her father, a wiry guy named Ka Domeng, gray at the temples, hands like he'd been mixing cement since he was 10. Firm handshake, looked me right in the eye. Her uncle was there too, Tito Ben, heavier set, did more of the talking. I noticed right away the wiring out there was a disaster. Exposed splices taped up with electrical tape gone brittle in the heat. A panel box that looked like it hadn't been touched since the Marcos administration, probably the first one. I mentioned it, just making conversation, and Ka Domeng laughed and said something about how it's worked fine for 15 years, so why fix it? I said, with respect, That's not really how electricity works. Ka Domeng liked that, laughed harder. I ended up spending most of that Saturday out there, no charge, just going through their panel with them, showing Tito Ben how to test a breaker properly instead of just flipping it and hoping. Felt good, honestly. Felt like the first useful thing I'd done with my hands since I landed. And I want to be straight with you here, because it's easy to look back and go, oh, that was the hook. That was them reeling me in. Maybe it was, but it also just felt like helping people. I don't know how to separate those two things even now. They had me stay for dinner. Maritis's mother made sinigang, this sour tamarind soup, and I remember being surprised how much I liked it, because normally I'm not a soup guy for dinner. That's a lunch thing where I'm from. Before we ate, Ka Domeng said grace, and everybody bowed their heads, and there was a real weight to it, not performative, just how the family did things. They said it in Tagalog mostly, but I caught the Panginoon part, Lord, and a few amens scattered through. Afterward, Tito Ben invited me to Sunday Mass with them. Said it casual, no pressure, and I actually went. Sat in the back of this hot little church with a ceiling fan barely turning, half the hymnal in a language I didn't understand. And it didn't feel like anybody was working an angle. It felt like being folded into something. Over the next couple months, that became a pattern. Weekend visits turned into weekday visits, turned into me just kind of being around. Marites and I were talking every day by then, mostly texting. Sometimes she'd call in the evening, and we'd just talk about nothing. Her day at the shop, my day doing not much of anything. I noticed I wasn't lonely anymore in the way I'd been my first 6 weeks in that apartment, listening to the neighbor murder Sinatra. That's worth something. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. What struck me, and I keep coming back to this, is how normal it all felt. No asks. Nobody hitting me up for money those first few months. If anything, I was the one offering, fixing their panel, picking up the tab for dinner a couple times. Small stuff, maybe 2,000-3,000 pesos here and there. 40, 50 bucks. Nothing that moved the needle on 95 grand. Ka Domeng started talking more and more about expansion. There was a tourist development going up on the road toward El Nido, resorts, a couple of new hotels, and he kept saying how the family's supply business could open a second branch out there if they had the capital. Said it would mean Mariti's younger brothers could finish school properly. Said it would mean Tito Ben's family wouldn't have to keep living the way they were living. He never asked me directly. He'd just talk about it over dinner, sort of thinking out loud, the way a man talks when he's hoping somebody in the room offers before he has to ask. I understood, even then, that there was something bigger sitting underneath those dinner table conversations. A weight. Obligation, I guess, though I didn't have the word for it yet. Marites would later teach me the actual term, utang na loob, this debt of gratitude that runs through everything over there. At the time, I just read it as a family that took care of each other, which, frankly, I found admirable. My own family barely calls each other on birthdays. I think about those dinners a lot now. How easy it would have been to just enjoy the sinigang and go home. I didn't do that. I started doing the math instead. By month 3, Marites and I were officially something. I say officially because there wasn't some big moment, no grand gesture. It just sort of accumulated. She started calling me sweetheart, mixed in with talk about rebar pricing. And one evening on the tricycle ride back from the warehouse, she just took my hand like it was nothing, like it had always been that way, and I remember not knowing what to do with my other hand, just sort of holding my seat like an idiot. I should say something here. I'm 59. Divorced once. Years back. No kids. Hadn't held a woman's hand in longer than I want to admit. So take everything I'm about to tell you with that in mind. I wasn't some naive kid, but I also wasn't exactly working with a clear head. The investment conversation didn't come from Marites. I want to be fair about that, because it matters. It came from Ka Domeng, over dinner. Maybe the fourth or fifth Sunday I'd been going to Mass with them. He was talking about the tourist development going up the road toward El Nido, hotels breaking ground, some resort chain putting in a property, all that construction needing supply. Cement, rebar, hollow blocks, roofing, the whole list. He said the family had been thinking about a second branch out that way for 2 years, but never had the capital to make the jump. Said it kind of wistfully, looking at his rice, not looking at me. Marites translated part of it even though he'd said most of it in English, just filling in details. Said if the second branch worked, her 2 younger brothers could finish their engineering degrees at Palawan State without her having to pull money out of the main shop every semester. Said Tito Ben's family could finally move out of the place they were renting. Nobody asked me for anything that night. I want to be clear about that. I brought it up myself a few days later, sitting with Marites at a Jollibee off Rizal Avenue, of all places, both of us eating Chicken Joy, and I asked her straight out what it would take to get that second branch open. She got quiet, said she didn't want me to feel obligated. I told her I didn't feel obligated. I felt like I finally had a reason to do something with the money sitting in my account, doing nothing. That's the part one keep coming back to. Nobody put a gun to my head. I offered. We worked out the first number together, at her family's kitchen table, her with a calculator and a notebook, adding it up like she was quoting me a job. Permits with the local government, initial stock of cement and rebar, some basic tools. 400,000 pesos. I did the conversion in my head. Call it $7,000, give or take, depending on the day's rate. Not nothing. But not something that was going to sink me either. I had 95 grand sitting in savings, plus my pension coming in every month. 7,000 felt like the kind of number you could lose and still sleep at night. We framed it as a loan. That word got used a lot. Loan, not gift, not investment. A loan, repaid once the branch turned a profit. Nobody wrote anything down. I want to be honest with you about that too, because I know how it sounds now. At the time it felt like it would have been almost insulting to ask for paperwork, like saying, I don't trust your family. And after everything with Ray back home, I told myself the problem wasn't trusting people, the problem was trusting the wrong people for the wrong reasons. This felt different. This felt like people who actually showed me their books, showed me their operation, prayed together, fed me dinner 4 nights a week. I wired the 400,000 pesos through a remittance service in town, some storefront near the public market with a queue out the door most afternoons. Took about 20 minutes. The woman behind the counter barely looked up. Ka Domeng hugged me afterward, actually hugged me, said something in Tagalog I didn't catch, and Marites told me later it roughly translated to, God will bless this. I remember flying home that night. Not flying, I mean back to my apartment, the karaoke guy going at it 2 doors down, and feeling good, genuinely good. Like I'd done something with my hands again, except this time it wasn't wiring, it was capital. I told myself I'd been careful. Small amount, clear terms. People I'd vetted with my own eyes for months, not some woman on a dating app I'd never met. I didn't call my brother that week, didn't tell him. I think some part of me already knew what he'd say, and I didn't want to hear it yet. 6 months after that first wire transfer, the branch site was ready. A leased lot right on the main road toward El Nido, close enough to the new resort construction that trucks rolled by all day hauling steel and lumber. Ka Domeng found the property himself, worked out a lease with the owner, and one Sunday after Mass, he laid the next number out for me like he was reading off a supply order. 1.8 million pesos. For the warehouse structure, the roofing, the initial big inventory buy. Cement by the truckload this time, not the small stuff. I did the math sitting right there at the table, everybody watching me do it, which I didn't love, but I did it anyway. Call it $32,000. That's not $7,000 anymore. That's real money. That's more than a third of what I had left. Here's where I should have stopped and gone home and called somebody. My brother, a lawyer, anybody. I didn't. What I did instead was ask the question I actually should have asked the first time around. How's this going to be structured, ownership-wise? And to be fair to them, they didn't dodge it. Tito Ben explained it pretty plainly, sitting there with his hands folded on the table like he was used to explaining this part to people. Said foreigners can't own land here, can't hold majority stake in most kinds of local corporations either. Not without jumping through hoops that take years and lawyers most families around here can't afford. Said the branch would be registered under Maritis's name and his as an extension of the existing family corporation. Said I'd come in as an advisor, a percentage of profits once things were running, first right of consultation on anything major. I remember nodding along like this all made sense. And look, legally, it does make sense. That part wasn't a lie. Foreigners really can't own property outright here. That's just how the law works. No getting around it with good intentions. Where I went wrong was not asking the follow-up question. What does advisor actually mean on paper? What's my percentage, written down where a court would recognize it? I didn't ask because asking felt like I was accusing people who'd fed me dinner for 6 months of trying to cheat me. I wired the money in 2 batches over about 3 weeks, through the same remittance place, the queue a little shorter that time of day. Second batch, the woman behind the counter actually remembered me, asked if I was building a house. I said something like it, laughed it off. Around this same stretch, small things started happening that I noted, and then set down. The way you'd notice a flicker in a light fixture and tell yourself you'll get to it later. A permit that was supposed to take 2 weeks took 6, and when I asked why, Maritis said something vague about the barangay office being slow this time of year. Fine, bureaucracy's slow everywhere, I told myself. I've dealt with building inspectors back home who'd make you wait a month for a signature. Tito Ben asked me, kind of offhand, not to mention the investment to some of the extended family yet, said it would just create jealousy, complications, better to wait until the branch was actually open and making money. I remember thinking that was a little strange, but I also thought, every family's got politics. Mine sure did. Maritis started drawing me further into the family in ways that felt, at the time, like genuine closeness. Her mother's rosary group welcomed me for a Friday evening prayer session, everyone taking turns with the beads, candlelight, that low murmuring rhythm of the Hail Mary going around the room in Tagalog. I didn't understand half of what was said, but I understood the feeling. I hadn't felt part of something like that in years. Maybe ever, if I'm honest. The warehouse got its roof up. Shelving went in. A small sign went up out front, hand-painted like the first shop, family name across the top. There was a modest little blessing ceremony when it opened. A priest came out, sprinkled holy water around the building, everybody in their good clothes, Maritis in a yellow dress I'd never seen her wear before, looking, for the first time since I'd met her, like a woman dressed up instead of a woman working. I stood there that day feeling like maybe, at 59 years old, 3,000 miles from Stockton, I'd actually built something again. Something with my name attached, even if it wasn't on any paper. I didn't know yet how literally true that last part was. My name wasn't on anything. Not one document, not one filing. Just a warehouse, a family, and a feeling I mistook for security. 3 months into the branch being open, the numbers should have been getting better. They weren't. Ka Doming told me one Sunday, apologetic, that a barangay official was holding up the final occupancy permit unless somebody paid what he called a processing fee. 1.2 million pesos. $21,000, roughly, depending on the rate that week. I sat with that number a long time before I said anything. $60,000 total by that point, if this last piece went through. More than half of what I'd walked into the country with. I asked, straight out, for a receipt. Something with a name on it, a stamp, anything. Ka Domeng got this look, not angry exactly, more like I'd asked him something naive. Said, that's not how it works with these guys. Said you don't get a receipt for a bribe. He wasn't wrong about that. I've since learned that's just how a certain amount of Philippine bureaucracy runs, and it made a kind of sense in the moment. But sense and safe aren't the same thing, and I paid it anyway. That's when the flicker I'd been ignoring for months finally turned into something I couldn't explain away. A guy I'd met at an expat meetup back in month 5. Retired Air Force, lived out past the airport, decent fella. We'd had a couple San Miguels together a handful of times. He mentioned offhand one night that he knew a paralegal back in the States who did remote work, pulling corporate documents from the Philippines SEC registry for guys who wanted to check on property or business deals before they got in too deep. Said half the guys at these meetups wished they'd called somebody like that before signing anything. I laughed it off at the time. Told him I trusted my people. Took me another 2 months to actually reach out to him. Don't ask me why I waited. I think some part of me knew what I'd find and didn't want to find it yet. His name's Walt, the paralegal, retired out of Fresno, my brother's actual friend from way back. Small world. I sent him what little paperwork I had. One document I'd signed, translated loosely for me at the time by Marites herself, which in hindsight is its own kind of red flag, having the person on the other side of the deal translate your own contract for you. Walt got back to me about 10 days later. Said he'd pulled the actual SEC filings for the corporation. I want to tell you exactly what that document said, because I've read it probably 200 times since. The corporation had been restructured, twice. Once about 4 months after my first payment, once again right around the time of that permit fee. Both times, shares got reissued. My name wasn't anywhere on it. Never had been. Not as advisor, not as anything. Tito Ben held it all, 100%, clean as a whistle on paper. I sat in my apartment with that PDF open on my laptop for, I don't know how long, fan going. Some kid's basketball bouncing on the court down the street. That same rhythm you hear everywhere over there, and I just sat there. I confronted Marites 2 days later. Waited 2 days because I wanted to be sure I wasn't going to say something I couldn't take back. We met at the Jollibee again. Same one. Felt almost cruel doing it there. But I didn't plan that. It's just where we always met. I laid the document on the table between us. Didn't say much at first. Just slid it over. She read it. Didn't cry. Didn't deny a word of it, which somehow made it worse. She got angry instead. Quiet angry. The kind where the voice drops instead of rises. Said, I knew the law when I signed. Said foreigners can't own land or hold majority in a corporation here. That's not new information. That's just how it is. And she never told me anything different. Said the restructuring protected the business, protected her father's name, protected everybody, including, she said, me. Because if something ever went wrong with the branch, at least my name wasn't attached to any of the debt either. I sat there, and I honestly didn't know what to say to that, because some of it was true. She wasn't lying about the law. She wasn't lying about the restructuring being, on paper, a defensible business decision. What she was leaving out is that nobody ever told me it was happening, that I found out from a stranger in Fresno, instead of from the woman I thought I was building a life with. I asked her the question I'd been avoiding the whole relationship. Did any of it mean anything? Was I ever anything to her besides the guy with the dollars? She didn't answer that clean either. Said both things were true. Said she cared about me and her family needed what I brought, and that those two facts didn't cancel each other out just because I wanted them to. I remember hating her a little for saying that, and also, God help me, understanding exactly what she meant. Because I'd done the same thing my whole life. Cared about people, and needed something from them at the same time. Wired a certain way, I guess. There's one more thing that came out that day, almost as an aside, that I didn't process right away. Part of the second batch of money, the warehouse batch, had gone toward an emergency hospital bill for her mother, a gallbladder surgery that came up sudden, something like 80,000 pesos, and nobody had told me that either. They just folded it into the construction costs. I don't even know how to feel about that one, honestly. Angry that they hid it. And also, if I'm being straight with you, glad her mother's okay. Both things. Still both things. I left the Jollibee that afternoon and didn't go back to the warehouse again. Not once. I drove past it a couple times after, on the way to somewhere else, saw the sign still up, family name across the top, and I just kept driving. I didn't go back to Puerto Princesa proper for almost 2 weeks after that. Just stayed in the apartment, aircon I finally installed, cranked up, doing the kind of math a man does when the math is already done and he just doesn't want it to be. $61,400, near enough, once I added it all up honest. Left me with a little under 34,000 plus the pension. Not broke. I want to say that clear, because some of these stories end with a guy sleeping in a bus terminal, and that wasn't me. But it wasn't the retirement I came out here to rebuild either. Walt, the paralegal, he's the one who talked me into small claims mediation instead of just walking away with my tail between my legs. Said even without a proper contract, the wire transfer records themselves were something. Proof money moved, proof it went toward a specific documented purpose. Said Philippine courts see this exact situation often enough that there's actual process for it, slow as it is. Took 4 months. 4 months of going back and forth to a mediation office in town, sitting in plastic chairs under a ceiling fan that barely moved the air, watching a government clerk shuffle papers while a rooster crowed outside like it had somewhere to be. Ka Domeng didn't show for 2 of the 4 sessions. Tito Ben came every time, sat there with his hands folded, same as always, same posture he'd used explaining the corporate structure to me at his own kitchen table. End of it, I walked away with 840,000 pesos. Call it $15,000. Pennies against 60 grand, I know. But it wasn't nothing, and more than the money, it told me the arrangement wasn't pure fiction. Somewhere in that mess, there'd been a real transaction. Real enough for a Philippine mediator to look at both sides and say, yeah, something's owed here. I saw Marites one more time before I flew home. Not planned. Ran into her at the Gaisano, of all places, both of us reaching for the same brand of instant coffee. We stood there in the aisle a minute. She asked how I was doing. I said I was doing okay, which was half true. She looked tired. Said the branch was still open, still struggling. Said her brothers were both still in school, though. So something out of all this worked the way it was supposed to. I didn't know what to do with that information. Still don't, really. I flew out of Puerto Princesa on a Thursday. Same tricycle and jeepney chaos on the way to the airport that I'd landed into 18 months before. Same roosters somewhere I couldn't see. $45,000 gone, near enough, once you net out what I got back. No business. No warehouse, not one with my name on it anyway. And this thing I still carry, that isn't quite anger, and isn't quite forgiveness, more like both of those things sitting next to each other, not touching. Here's what I'd tell another guy in my position, and I mean this straight, no dressing it up. If you're putting money into anything over there, a business, a house, a piece of land, doesn't matter what they call it, get it on paper before the money moves, not after. Get a lawyer, a real one, not a cousin who studied a little law once. Ask for the corporate filings yourself instead of trusting somebody's translation of your own contract. The law over there isn't hiding from you. It's just not going to walk up and introduce itself either. You have to go find it, and you have to do that before you're standing in a kitchen watching a family you love do the math for you. And don't mistake a family's love for a guarantee. Both things can be true at once. That's the part that took me longest to sit with. Maritese's family, far as I can tell, genuinely believes they didn't wrong me. In their eyes, they protected the business, the way any family protects what's theirs. And I was never quite theirs. Not on paper, not where it mattered. I don't think that makes them monsters. I think it makes them people who understood the law a lot better than I did. In a country where I was always going to be the one holding the weaker hand. I'm back in California now. Renting, this time, no interest in owning anything for a while. Still talk to my brother most weeks. He doesn't say I told you so. Give him credit for that. And that's Lyle's story. What strikes me most, hearing it laid out like that, is how little of it was a con in the way we usually picture one. Nobody catfished him. Nobody invented a fake identity. A family did what families over there often do, protected their own, used the tools the law gave them, and left a foreigner holding a debt of gratitude that turned out to carry no legal weight at all. Lyle isn't wrong to feel both things about Maritese. That's honestly the through line in a lot of what we cover on this channel. It's rarely pure villainy, and it's rarely pure foolishness. It's usually somewhere tangled in between, two people wanting different, incompatible things from the same arrangement. Stories like Lyle's are why we put this guide together. Everything we've learned from the people who've shared what went wrong, all gathered in one place. It's in the description, if it's something you need. Thanks for watching Inside the Philippines. If Lyle's story hit something for you, drop a comment. We read every one of them. We'll see you in the next one.